On April 8th, 1940, a Polish submarine, Orzel, under British command, sank a German ship off the coast of Norway. 4 nations involved. The Second World War would eventually involve 61 nations. It was a multi-ethnic conflagration, ignited in part by the ideology of National Socialist fascism and its attempt to remake Europe according to racial and ethnic ideologies. On the same date, 4,000 miles away, April 8, 1940, Barbara Lasowski, a Polish woman, under American command, entered a working-class neighborhood in Detroit, Michigan, just across the river from Canada. Lasowski was a census taker, and she recorded the names and place of birth of each resident on Shields Avenue on Detroit's east side. It was a multinational, multi-ethnic street. Most of the adults living on that street had been born in places like Poland, Lithuania, Italy, Russia, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, or Scotland, like my grandparents and my mother. The next day, April 9th, while Lasowski visited more families on the very next street, including my father and his parents from the Austro-Hungarian and Russian empires, Hitler invaded Norway and Denmark, beginning an occupation lasting 5 years. This is the working class neighborhood, by the way, Shields Avenue. So Hitler invaded Norway and Denmark. In 1940, the triumph of fascism seemed inevitable. Yet many sons of these Detroit Poles, Czechs, Italians, Serbians, Russians, including my father, became American soldiers and helped to defeat the fascists. In America, not long after the war, another war began that continues today, involving more than 61 nations. It is the war against the family. The triumph of its well-funded ideological fascist campaign may seem inevitable, but families of many ethnic backgrounds are determined to defeat it. And thank you, World Congress of Families, for engaging in the fight. Let us look a little bit more closely at Detroit. In 1940, Detroit was an industrialized society with plentiful jobs and factories of American automakers like Henry Ford. Detroit grew quickly. Ford's Model T went into production in 1908 and sold millions. Ford needed workers. Detroit grew from 465,000 residents to 1.6 million residents in 1940. This is the period of 30 years, making it the 4th largest city in America. Detroit was mass producing not only automobiles, it was making Americans. Also in 1908, Israel Zangwill, British author and son of Jewish immigrants from the Russian Empire, wrote a play called The Melting Pot. Performed in the United States for audiences that included President Theodore Roosevelt, The Melting Pot proclaimed, "America is God's crucible, the great melting pot where all the races of Europe are melting and reforming. Germans and Frenchmen, Irishmen and Englishmen, Jews and Russians, into the crucible with you all. God is making the American." The American was allegedly a new kind of man. Now, Henry Ford imagined that he too was making Americans. To integrate the growing number of foreign workers in Detroit, in 1914 he established the Ford English School. On American Independence Day, 1917, graduates of Ford's English School, wearing their native dress, This is from that school, graduation. Descended into a large pot labeled the American melting pot. After going through a virtual smelting process, the immigrant's identity was boiled away, leaving a new citizen to emerge from the pot wearing American clothes and waving American flags. The school focused on training immigrants in the English language and providing civics lessons necessary to become U.S. citizens. To be an American meant embracing the idea of liberty. All men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But Americans have betrayed liberty, as many of the soldiers and veterans from World War II families have said in their later years. The kind of liberty that you're seeing fought for today, LGBT bathrooms, for example, they did not fight for that. That is not what they fought for. But when war came, soldiers' wives, sisters, and mothers took their husbands, brothers, and sons' jobs in the factories and went to work making weapons. Nearly 6 million weapons, 2.8 million tanks and trucks, 27,000 aircraft. Equipment was even shipped to the Soviet Union. From 1941 to 1943, 400,000 people moved to Detroit to work in its factories. American military equipment helped lead to victory in Western Europe and the Pacific. Now, after the victory in the war, America spared the physical destruction of war that Europe suffered, prospered economically. Detroit itself boasted the highest per capita income in the United States. In the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the United States confronted each other in global ambitions, nuclear weapons and the race into outer space. They competed economically. Would capitalism or communism produce a better standard of living? Success was defined by the quantity of consumer and industrial goods. American leaders emphasized buying consumer goods to help keep its factories busy. High consumption became a moral imperative. This was also a materialistic view of society. Both capitalism and communism look at society from a materialistic vantage point. But man does not live by bread alone. America at the time prided itself on technological success, creative ingenuity, and power over nature. Man walks on the ground, why not fly to the moon? Cars and factories can be redesigned as well, so why not redesign the family? If high consumption is good, why not redesign sex for even higher consumption of sex? A sexual revolution aided by new technologies hit families hard in the 1960s. The revolutionary campaign to divorce sex from procreation and marriage was aided by the birth control pill made available to unmarried adults in 1969. In 1973, less than 30 years since Americans had witnessed the gruesome piles of bodies in Hitler's concentration camps, the U.S. Supreme Court legalized abortion mills where the corpses of infants were discarded in garbage bags. The fires of this revolution have been growing for decades, flamed by new views of sexuality, including those of Sigmund Freud, Margaret Mead, Margaret Sanger, Alfred Kinsey, and pornographer Hugh Hefner. The sexual rebellion did not happen by itself. It wasn't natural. These and other revolutionaries attacked the foundations of marriage and still do today. At the same time, 1960s, America's intellectuals and government increasingly treated families merely as interchangeable units of society. I don't think there were evil purposes behind this, but that's the way society was looking. Very industrial, mechanical. Families are to be engineered according to the desires of the state with little regard for the concerned families. In the late 1960s, Detroit families faced a decision. After the race riots of 1967, racial harmony was sought. Social engineers and federal courts sought to racially integrate public schools using mandatory school busing of students across the city to other neighborhoods. Families did not want to send their children across town to other schools. Many parents left their homes in Detroit and moved. Detroit lost residents quickly because they were family-oriented. Businesses left, taxpayers. Detroit would lose 60% of its population by the year 2000. There's a picture of Detroit in 1950. Downtown, very prosperous. Highest per capita in the nation. That's Hiroshima in 1945, defeated by the Allies. And our population went from 1.8 million to 600,000. 67 years later, Hiroshima, and then on the bottom you see Hiroshima in 2012. You see Detroit up on the top in 1945, and there's a picture from Detroit in 2012. What a contrast. That's another aerial shot of Detroit. There's huge tracts of vacant land. Some of it they're talking about putting back into farmland. This is a true story you don't hear much about. If you threaten the family, you threaten the society. If you wanted to rebuild Detroit, you would need families to rebuild it. But the family is more than just a unit of society. A unit suggests a mechanical or static view of society, as if society were an automobile that you can take apart in pieces and put back together. That we are units, and therefore interchangeable units. But a family is unique. Each individual is created in the image of God and completely unique in the entire universe. And every family is entirely unique. We are not interchangeable units. Now, our neighborhood back in 1940 was made up of families who didn't speak the same language. How did they survive as a society? Because they were families. They did speak common language. They had the same goals. They left their homes and came to America to transplant themselves as families or to start families. Even if they could not speak the same language, they understood a deeper universal language, that of marrying, working, feeding, clothing, saving, building, educating, giving their children in marriage, the full cycle of family life. They held concepts in common, expressed in their own language: marriage, husband, wife, son, daughter, home, love, fidelity, grandma, grandpa. Everybody on the planet knows what those things are, even if they can't share them linguistically. Consider how different a society is from a family in this regard. A society comes in many different forms. You can have a tribal society, an agricultural society, a communist, capitalist, socialist, fascist, totalitarian, imperial, colonial, feudal, a consumer, theocratic, or a democratic society, or a combination thereof. And you have to explain to a stranger how any one of those particular kinds of society works, because they are not essential. They are constructed. The family is essential. We all know what a family is. It's written in our bones, and we don't have to explain it. There's something very essential. Each family is a unique new creation from the marital union of a husband and wife. Mother, father, child are essential building blocks of not any particular society, but of humanity itself and its own history. A living family I missed some pictures here, but that's family life back in 1940. Some of my relatives, actually. A living family draws life from its past ancestors and directs its power upward into future descendants, just like a tree. The trunk of that tree is marriage. The family is a force of life. It is not manufactured. It is in the created order. Father Loya has spoken very eloquently about that, so I don't need to. And the family is certainly more than a biological reality. When God says, be fruitful and multiply, he's not just giving Adam and Eve a command to follow out. It's not just words. Here's some instructions. When he creates and says, be fruitful, he endows them with the ability and the capacity to be fruitful and multiply. When he says, let there be light, there is light. When he says, be fruitful and multiply, he's giving the fertility to them. And they are fulfilled by living according to that nature. So it's not just a matter of obeying a word from God. It's not external. Creation of Adam and Eve. I have to go through this quickly. Just a very simple point. We all have digestive system, respiratory systems, neurological systems, circulatory systems. Nobody in this room has a human reproductive system. Nobody. It only exists, well, this is by design. Let's back up here. It only exists when the man and the woman are together in a marital union. That's the only time. That's what the reproductive system is. That's what it means in Scripture. They two shall become one flesh. That's where the family comes from. So that's the unified system. Male and female make a whole, order to an end to a family. Marriage fixes a bond. This is what happens. And it's natural. Father Loya has spoken of the example of Christ as the bridegroom. In the iconography of the church here, we see that Eve is created from the side of Christ, the new Adam who falls asleep on the cross. The church is born from his side, just as the old Adam. Christ, the bridegroom. The bridegroom is a symbol of self-giving and self-donation. And that's what family is really all about. The 20th century saw 2 world wars and a Cold War. We recognize the current world war sparked by the so-called sexual revolution. It is a global gender fascism. I'm going to skip a bit here. To go back to the family, it's heavenly and belongs in. It's something created by God. It's witnessed to by many people. It's not just a thing. This expansion of the church's jurisdiction, of the state's jurisdiction, is breathtaking, and it really is totalitarianism. When they tell you how to use your words and define language, that's totalitarianism, because we inherit our language from our forefathers and foremothers from other times. When the government and the state tells you what words mean, especially words so essential as familiar words, that's totalitarianism, and it needs to be resisted. So resist the gender fascists of the world who are fighting against the family in a new sexual world war. Their triumph is not inevitable. The family is the fundamental lifeblood of any healthy society. It's the lifeblood of the whole human race. God's true melting pot or crucible is the family, in which we are to learn the lessons of love, sacrifice, and forgiveness. Thank you.